In this video, we're going to explore how lean principles really help enable the strategic planning process, the strategic thinking process in a direct way. I believe that strategy isn't lean or not lean, but lean thinking, lean behaviors, lean skills can help enhance the strategic thinking process in some very profound ways. So I'm going to use the 5 principles from The Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean as a way to sort of walk through some examples of how lean thinking does make that change. So first, we'll start at the top of the house with direct observation of work. Now, what does this mean? This means that we go and see. We go do direct observation of the problem that we're trying to solve strategically. Right? So Toyota is a good example of this, where in understanding their customers, most automakers don't do anything with all their people traveling. When you work for Ford and you travel, you rent a Ford. But Toyota took a different approach. They would deliberately rent the competition's cars. And they would spend the first 15 minutes in the parking lot playing with all the doors and cubby holes and buttons and everything else. And then they'd write a report and deliver that back to the product development people. They would go and see the competition, again, in a deliberate and purposeful way to help shape strategy from a product standpoint. In the lean startup movement, one of the most profound things that is really insisted upon to make this work, anyone going through a class in lean startup is required to go talk to customers. You only may have half an idea, but you're still required to go talk to customers and start to validate, to understand what the customer really sees, how they think, how they work, what their problems are. And so you don't do any strategy development in the lean startup movement without going to see real customers. The next principle we want to talk about is systematic waste elimination. Now, the best way to say this is that we stop doing what either distracts or dilutes our strategy. Those are a version of waste on a strategic landscape. Turnaround CEOs are famous for eliminating this exact kind of waste. They start to look at what a company needs to focus on, they come in, and they basically stop doing everything else that doesn't deliver on that. And that includes the product portfolio. In many organizations, there's a good chunk of the product portfolio, somewhere between 20 and sometimes even 80%, that isn't really making money and isn't really contributing to the portfolio. Sure, there's a reason that those products are there, but it's waste as it doesn't really deliver on the strategy. We continue moving around the house and we look at high agreement of both what and how, or in a word, standardization. So fundamentally, this means consistency of action that does deliver on that strategy. You might have put some actions in place to craft your strategy, but if you don't have consistency in how that's delivered, your strategy doesn't go anywhere. Spotify is a good example of this, where their strategy in part is to have a very feature-rich and consumer-centric software platform. And as a result, they have very clear standards for how they bring in new features and for how they deliver it on a consistent fashion. And so how they operate from a high agreement standpoint is all built around standardizing on the delivery of their strategy. Learning organization, which is at the beginning, the middle of the house, it's really one fundamental thing, and that is test, test, test. Test your assumptions, because there's many assumptions that go into every strategy. Test your solutions. As you start to put them in the market, don't assume that your solutions are the right solutions. Test those as well. A very large example of this would be going back to Toyota, who really wanted to start as a strategy to embrace younger buyers. And so there's a big strategy, one that took many, many years and lots of money, but they created an entire brand, Scion, to test how those consumers operated. These were products really very targeted at a very specific market, and how they sold, how they designed, how they packaged features were all experiments to learn how to engage a different customer segment. Ultimately, they didn't keep the brand, but that wasn't because the brand had failed, it had actually served its purpose. They had learned much more about that customer segment, and they could integrate those lessons into other brands. And last, I want to talk about systematic problem solving. And the reason I'm covering this last is because in many ways, strategy is all about problem solving. You're solving two different types of problems. First, you're solving your customers' problems, the market's problems, the consumer's problems. To deliver value, you must solve a problem that someone else has. But second, strategy is about also solving your problems, understanding, finding, closing your gaps that help you deliver on what you intend. And so strategy is all about problem solving, and when you embrace it as a problem solving exercise, you have a much better chance of achieving the gaps, the execution and delivery that you really set out to do. So think about how lean practices, behaviors, and mindsets start to intersect with your strategic thinking and your strategic planning process. And I assure you, it will be more successful.